Out near Nome in Alaska, people literally dive into freezing ocean water with suction dredges and vacuum the seafloor for gold. It sounds like something invented for reality TV, but it's real. Offshore gold mining exists because ancient gold-bearing landscapes were drowned when sea levels rose, leaving placer deposits sitting beneath the ocean floor. Now imagine doing that in Melbourne, not in some remote Arctic wilderness, not on the far side of the world, right here in Port Phillip Bay. Imagine pulling on a wetsuit, dropping beneath the green water, descending through the murk until your boots hit the muddy floor of the bay. Above you, ferries move between suburbs, sailboats drift overhead. Somewhere in the distance, container ships make their way toward Melbourne's port. And in your hands is a dredge hose, sucking sediment off the seafloor in search of gold. It sounds ridiculous, but is it? Because Port Phillip Bay is astonishingly shallow. The average depth is only around 13 metres. In huge parts of the bay, you wouldn't be descending into some abyss. You'd be standing in water shallower than many recreational dive sites. It's so shallow, in fact, that enormous dredging projects have had to carve deeper shipping channels just to allow large commercial vessels into Melbourne. So physically, if the geology supported it, recovering material from the bay floor would not be some impossible engineering fantasy. And that raises a question most people have probably never even considered. Could there actually be gold under Port Phillip Bay? Not a random speck washed in from somewhere distant, a genuine drowned goldfield. Because once you start looking at Victoria's geology, this idea stops sounding crazy surprisingly quickly. The first clue is that Melbourne may be already sitting on buried gold country. Most people think of Melbourne as concrete, suburbs, freeways, cafes, and endless housing estates. But beneath huge parts of the city lies a volcanic blanket, basalt from Victoria's younger volcanic episodes that poured across the older landscape and sealed it beneath dark lava rock. And wherever that volcanic lid is absent, something interesting happens. Gold appears. Look at Warrandyte, one of Victoria's legitimate historic goldfields. Look toward Diamond Creek. Look toward the Mornington Peninsula, where gold discoveries were also made. The pattern becomes hard to ignore. Where older geology is exposed, gold exists. Which immediately raises the uncomfortable possibility that the basalt-covered parts of Melbourne aren't barren at all. They're simply hidden. And that gets even more interesting when you realise gold was actually found beneath Melbourne itself. During the 1800s, reports emerged of gold discoveries in blue clay beneath the city, including nuggets reportedly as large as peas. That matters enormously, because tiny flour gold can travel long distances in river systems, but pea-sized gold? That's different. Gold is incredibly dense. Large pieces do not casually drift enormous distances downstream unless the hydraulic conditions are extreme, which means that gold likely came from somewhere relatively nearby. And if gold was being deposited in ancient Yarra-related sediments beneath Melbourne, then the obvious question becomes, where was the source? A buried quartz reef? A hidden auriferous palaeochannel? An older alluvial system now sealed beneath lava? Now at this point, if you're starting to realise this might not be as crazy as it sounded at the beginning, do me a favour. Hit like, subscribe and click the hype button, because we're only just getting started. Because once we bring buried rivers, volcanoes and a sinking landscape into this story, things get properly weird. Because the Yarra River we see today is almost certainly not the only Yarra that ever existed. Ancient rivers migrate, valleys shift, drainage systems reorganise over geological time. And when geophysicists started looking beneath Port Phillip and Melbourne, they found evidence of hidden river systems buried beneath younger geology, ancient palaeochannels, ghost rivers. Some of these buried drainage pathways are visible in geophysical datasets, including magnetic imagery, tracing channels now concealed beneath volcanic cover and sediment. And one of the most fascinating interpretations is that the ancestral Yarra drainage system once extended through terrain now buried beneath Port Phillip. Think about what that means. If ancient versions of the Yarra crossed this landscape, and if those rivers drained gold-bearing country upstream, then the mechanism for transporting gold into what is now Port Phillip Bay absolutely existed. And the Yarra does drain gold-bearing country. Not hypothetically, actually. Warrandyte alone proves that. And upstream, the broader geology ties into the gold-rich systems associated with Victoria's ancient sedimentary belts extending from the Great Dividing Range. Gold was in the system. That part is not speculation. But then the story gets stranger, because Port Phillip Bay contains volcanoes. That's right, the bay itself isn't just a quiet marine basin. It contains volcanic centres tied to Victoria's younger volcanic history, which means lava didn't just reshape the land around Melbourne, it likely interacted directly with older drainage systems. And this is where Victoria's gold history becomes incredibly relevant, because some of the richest gold ever mined in this state came from deep leads, ancient river channels filled with gold-bearing gravels that were later buried beneath lava flows. Miners learned that the visible rivers at surface weren't the whole story. Sometimes the real gold sat in forgotten rivers, hidden beneath volcanic rock. So when you see buried channels associated with ancient drainage systems beneath Melbourne and Port Phillip, intersecting volcanic geology, this isn't some unprecedented fantasy. Victoria already proved a concept. Now scale that up, because Port Phillip didn't simply flood. Parts of this entire region actually subsided dramatically over geological time, forming what geologists call the Port Phillip Sunkland. In some areas, the structural depression reaches extraordinary depths, sinking up to 600 meters vertically. And if you want the full tectonic breakdown of how that happened, I actually made an entire video on the Port Phillip Sunkland, so you'll find that in the description. Now subsidence complicates the story. It doesn't mean ancient gold deposits remain perfectly preserved exactly where they formed. Rivers shift, sediments get reworked, marine transgressions can disturb older deposits. But what subsidence does tell us is that this is not some simple shallow puddle over flat ground. This is a deeply modified geological basin hiding an older landscape. And before volcanic eruptions reshaped much of Melbourne, that landscape was dominated by Silurian sedimentary rocks. Now, if you know Victorian gold geology, that should immediately grab your attention, because Silurian sediments are not geological nobodies, they're proven gold hosts. Warrandyte's gold exists in that world. Some of Victoria's auriferous story also exists in that world. So before the basalt, before the bay, before sea level rise, Melbourne sat on geology that was entirely capable of generating gold. Now picture that ancient landscape. No city, no docks, no ferries, and no bay. Just rolling terrain cut by rivers moving across exposed plains toward a coastline that sat much further away than today. Some channels may have remained exposed. Others may have later been buried beneath lava. Some may have trapped coarse alluvial gold. Others may have carried fine material further downstream. And if those ancient river systems extended into what is now Port Phillip, then drowned placer deposits become a completely legitimate geological possibility. Not certainty, but possibility. But there's another possibility here that makes this story even stranger. Up until now, we've been treating Port Phillip as the downstream end of a transport story, a place where gold from elsewhere may have been carried and concentrated by ancient rivers. But what if some of that gold didn't come from upstream at all? What if it came from inside the bay itself? Because before the flooding, before the marine mud, before volcanic eruptions reshaped the region, Port Phillip wasn't a bay, it was land. And that land likely wasn't some completely different geological world from the surrounding Melbourne region. Much of pre-Bay Port Phillip may well have consisted of the same Silurian age sedimentary rocks that dominate gold-bearing terrain around Melbourne. And if that's true, then the implications are enormous, because those rocks are proven gold hosts. Which means Port Phillip may not simply have been receiving gold from elsewhere, it may have been generating it. Then there's the structural story. Because Port Phillip is not geologically quiet, major fault systems define the broader region, including significant structural boundaries around the basin itself. And faults matter enormously in gold geology, because faults are not just cracks in the crust, they're plumbing systems, deep pathways that allow hot hydrothermal fluids to rise through rock, carrying dissolved metals, including gold. That's exactly how many primary gold systems form. So if major fault structures were active through the region, cutting through prospective sedimentary rocks, then the ingredients for local gold mineralization absolutely existed. Suddenly, this isn't just a story about ancient rivers transporting placer gold. It becomes a story about buried hard rock potential too. Quartz reefs, fault-hosted mineralization, local erosion feeding nearby alluvial systems. Which would actually help explain something intriguing, those larger gold nuggets found beneath Melbourne. Because while transported gold from upstream is certainly possible, coarse gold often points toward a relatively nearby source. And if parts of that source once existed in terrain now buried beneath suburbs, basalt, or even Port Phillip itself, then Melbourne's hidden gold story becomes even more compelling. Which brings us back to the gnome comparison. Because gnome's offshore gold exists because ancient terrestrial gold systems became submerged. That exact preservation mechanism is not unique to Alaska. The question is whether Victoria's specific geological history produced something similar. And honestly, there are enough pieces here to make the question genuinely compelling. Gold already existed upstream. Melbourne's geology was prospective before burial. Ancient river systems crossed the region. Volcanic flows buried landscapes, and Port Phillip later flooded. And some historical gold discoveries suggest Melbourne itself may have had a much more local source than most people realise. So why isn't anyone out there dredging Port Phillip Bay looking for gold? It's simple, the law. Because even if the geology made sense, the legal reality is an entirely different story. Dredging for gold in Victorian waters is not some casual weekend hobby. There are extensive restrictions surrounding marine exploration, seabed disturbance, environmental protection, navigation, permits and protected zones. Port Phillip is one of Australia's busiest and most environmentally sensitive marine systems. You can't just rock up with a suction dredge and start vacuuming the bay floor because you had an exciting geological theory at breakfast. That world doesn't exist here, which creates the perfect ending to this mystery. Because unlike some geological questions where the answer is immediately testable, this one sits in a strange space. A hidden landscape, a plausible transport mechanism, a proven gold-bearing source upstream, buried ancient channels, volcanic preservation, and a drowned basin. And illegal barriers that make casual exploration effectively impossible. So, is there actually a lost goldfield beneath Port Phillip Bay? Maybe. But if ancient Melbourne really did host gold-bearing rivers flowing across land that now lies underwater, then one of Australia's strangest hidden geological stories might be sitting beneath the boats, mud and shipping lanes of Port Phillip, completely invisible to everyone passing overhead. I hope you found this as interesting as I did, and as always, thanks for watching. Before I end this video, I'd like to give a big shout out to my Patreon and YouTube members. Thank you so much to everyone that helps to support this channel.